Welcome to Birken Forest Monastery's live stream. I'm Ajahn Sona. Let's have the first question, Pia.
Ajahn, our first question today is from the live stream from Raphael in France. You have spoken about researching the connections between early Buddhist and Christian societies. Do you have any thoughts on why Jesus was killed and the Buddha was not?
Yeah, so this is Easter. I guess this is why the subject of Jesus dying and so forth. So there were attempts on the life of the Buddha. Aside from his cousin Devadatta attempting to kill him early and take over the Sangha, there were other attempts to discredit him, etc. The Buddha was from the Kshatriya class, which is the warrior caste, and there was sort of an uneasy truce between the Brahmin caste and the Kshatriyas. The Brahmins, as you see in some of the suttas, the Brahmins were somewhat offended by the teachings of the Buddha. They were used to being in charge of the religious dimensions of life. And so there was anger and resentment. Some of the arguments were heated on the Brahminical side, and the Buddha was responding with great calm. You see this in a sort of a different geopolitical situation. The other element is kama or karma, and the Buddha did not have short life karma. So basically, it is said. So here's an interesting teaching about karma. It is said that one of the things, a Buddha cannot be killed. He can have some minor injuries, which he did with the damage to his foot from the attempt on his life by his cousin Devadatta. He obviously got sick near the end of his life from food poisoning. By the way, for those who are, in the know about Buddhist history and so forth, the Buddha did not die from food poisoning. He had predicted the relinquishing of his life force 3 months before. The last meal was simply accepted on the basis of merit for the person who offered it. And according to the stories, awareness of the food was tainted, and he became very ill. But the so-called cause of death was not the contaminated food, but a decision made earlier by the Buddha that the sasana had been established and it was okay to relinquish his life. In the case of Christ, it was some strong decisions were made, and obviously he was able to be killed, or maybe not. This is similar to Heidegger's uncertainty principle, where the cat is in a box, Schrodinger's uncertainty thing, a cat. Yeah, Schrodinger's cat is similar to Jesus. Like, is he dead or is he alive? So they crucify him, so-called put him to death, then he reappears. So a classic case of Schrodinger's cat, If you're not aware of that, then you have to look up Schrodinger's cat, which was never meant to be serious. Schrodinger, sometimes people actually think that Schrodinger was serious about this cat in this box and the quantum uncertainty, but it was really to point out the ludicrous nature of applying quantum physics to the macro scale of things. Anyway, we are off on a tangent here. I mean, this, for a long time, historically, these two characters, Christ and the Buddha, have interesting similarities, and they're quite different than other religious figures. They, certainly in the case of the Buddha, he's an advocate of pacifism and peace, non-killing in all situations, etc. Christ seems to be that way, and the early Christians seem to be pacifists. Later on, it seems to be hijacked by religious institutions, and they managed to devise just wars and all the reasons why you can get rich and etc. But they're unique in their attitude, coming out of a very barbaric world. The kind of barbarities that took place in ancient history are mind-boggling. Of course, this, even in the 20th century with the Second World War and so forth, we're close to mind-boggling atrocities as well. But the ancient world was that and more, and very startling advocacies on the parts of both of them to practice peace and love. So, yeah, that the geopolitical situation in Israel at the time of Christ was the Romans were running the place, and so a military dictatorship, an invasion of the country, etc. So, a dangerous place to be, and Christ was not the only one that was put to death. Many were. Whereas in the time of the Buddha, it was more tolerance allowed. Philosophers at the time, and there were a number of other philosophers at the time of the Buddha, were able to talk about their attitudes to life, and there was quite a spectrum of them. Virtually all of the philosophies and attitudes of life that we have in the modern times were also found at the time of the Buddha. And people were not, put to death or burnt alive, burnt at the stake or anything for these opinions. So it was a fairly open opportunity. The other figure that when we talk about being put to death is interesting to compare with the Buddha is more like Socrates. Socrates is almost, if you look at modern dating of the life of the Buddha and Socrates, you'll find they're almost identical. Socrates lived from 470 BC to 400 BC. And the modern dating of the Buddha's life by sort of Western scholars is now about 480 BC to 400 BC, almost a perfect match. Socrates, at 70 years old, was put to death in Athens. He was forced to drink the hemlock they said, because of certain views questioning the validity of ideas about the nature of the gods at the time and corrupting the youth of Athens. The Buddha was also upset a lot of people, denying some of the Brahminical beliefs and a number of the power of certain of the deities and so forth. So he also disappointed and upset people. These are the nature of new ideas coming into societies. The martyrdom of Socrates and the martyrdom of Jesus are rather similar. So the stories, which would be very, very similar, very, very familiar to the Christians and Jews of the time, the awareness of the Greek philosophers and the Greek culture was universal throughout the Middle East, and Greek was spoken commonly. It was an international language. So the parallels between Socrates and Jesus are are quite interesting as well, and both were put to death, and etc. So, and Socrates, in some ways, seems to have risen from the dead in terms of the preservation of his teachings. So we're very aware of Socrates, and part of the power of Socrates is that he was martyred and unjustly prosecuted for his ideas, which were very advanced for the time. Do remember also that the New Testament was written first in Greek, the first, and for a period of time, most of the scriptures, including the Old Testament, were written in Greek and preserved in Greek. So the Greek overlap with Christianity is very interesting, very strong. I'm actually writing a paper now. I'm, 3,500 words into it now, on connections between the Greeks and India, and Greek influence, or in the midst of Buddhism, Greek monks in the midst of Buddhism, Greek Buddhist monks. And I will also write about any influence back towards the Middle East from India and Buddhist ideas. Stay tuned for that. I've been talking about this for quite some time, and it takes a lot of research. I spent the last couple of years educating myself on all the new information that's coming out. This is quite a golden age of new information about the Indian history and Middle Eastern history. One of the reasons why is because we have DNA and genetic studies that show migration patterns that we could never access before through our archaeology. So I will make that paper available when it's finished. And we will also make a video or 2 or 3 on this whole subject of the interconnections, influences, etc., between Greece and India, and then the Buddhist influence on Christianity as well. Okay, so let's go on to the next question, Pia.
Next question from the live chat is from Arvind in Seattle, Washington, United States. I worked hard for many years to become a professional scientist and have had some recent breakthroughs in my work. However, circumstances may force me to move to a place with limited research opportunities to stay with my partner. I don't know how to choose between my passion and my relationship. Do you have any thoughts on this from a Buddhist perspective?
Yeah, I can't tell you what your decision should be, but I can tell you that this is the nature of samsara. These difficult, problematic decisions are presented to us in existence, and this is the problem of existence: is that it's unsatisfactory. You can't have both. You can't get what you want, and so this is the Dhamma, in a sense, relieves you from the suffering of this. So if you already have a strong sense that these kind of situations come up, unsatisfactory situations where you can't have your cake and eat it too, the basic insight into this, the uncertainty and lack of control of the situation, is part of the process of meditation, where you keep repeating to yourself, don't worry, everything's out of control. In other words, these kind of situations come up, and we can worry about them or make stress about them, emotional distress about them, or not. When we make our work very, very, very important to us, that it must be this way and it must be that way and I must get satisfaction, and now we make our relationships that, they're so important to us, our happiness depends on a relationship. then we can get conflicts between these things. So we must say there is another level of the game where my well-being and happiness transcends my role in my studies and my work, and it transcends even my relationships. But if we stay at the level, now here's a saying by Freud when his analysis of the situation that what gives meaning to people are two things: work and love. And basically what he meant by love was family, close friends, romantic situations, and marriage. And then what work is that you have to spend much of your life working. And these are the two things that are most, the most important things to people. And so, but that's a limited understanding. The Buddha is saying, watch out, because that's where all the tragedies happen as well. If you lose your job, it's devastating. If you lose your livelihood, it's devastating. How do you function? By the way, this is happening quite widely in the economy, at least in the U.S., etc. Is that a lot of men are no longer making enough money and are gainfully employed to have status and meaning in their relationships. So with work, also, if the work is not adequate and the wages are not adequate, then you also lose the love aspect, the ability to support families and so forth. So you see a lot of despair. This is the danger of functioning at that level, putting all your eggs in that basket. These are worldly baskets. Work and love are worldly baskets. And the rug can be snatched out from underneath you at any time. So you got to look for a higher level of well-being and happiness than either your work or your love relationships, because all of them are subject to uncertainty and passing away. So this is the more or less the religious or philosophical game. It's like, can I find a position in an attitude in life that transcends both work and love? And that's your work, your Dhamma work, is to find that position where you're well, happy, peaceful in the midst of this uncertainty. Sometimes you have the perfect job, the perfect research project that is appreciated by everybody, sometimes not. Sometimes you have the right relationship, but some people die, people change, things fall apart, so forth. How are you in those circumstances? Mm-hmm. So that's the idea of Dhamma, is to find a transcendent position which allows you to be well in the midst of these dilemmas that the world presents to you. Yeah.
Next question is from the live chat from Randon Ramblings in Detroit, Michigan, United States. When someone rings a meditation bell and says, "Ooh, I love the sound of that, so I'll ring it again," and rings it more, isn't that unwholesome sense desire?
Yeah, you can get awfully uptight about details like that. I would not, even amongst spiritual people, monks and so forth, some casual types of speech is practiced, and whoever said, "Oh, I love the sound of that bell, let's ring it again," may not have meant it at any deep level. It may have been a very light or shallow thing. So not to project too much into little things that people say. The Buddha would not have said that, but on the other hand, most people aren't the Buddha, and so people say these things. How deep it is meant by them is another matter altogether. Yeah.
Next question is from Paul in Spring City, Pennsylvania, United States. In the suttas, it's said that in and out breathing ceases upon the fourth jhana, and in his essay, Reading the Natural Mind, Ajahn Chah states that the breath at this stage actually occurs through the pores of the skin. A quick Google search indicates that roughly 1 to 2% of the oxygen in the average person is indeed absorbed transdermally. I found this fascinating and would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's kind of scientifically fascinating, but I don't necessarily think that's accurate. I mean, Ajahn Chah might have said that. He was trying to. These kind of things were not specifically said in the suttas, nor in the commentaries, really. What is said is that, when you go into deep meditation, the fourth jhana, by the way, is a supernormal attainment. Very, very few people on the planet will ever attain to the fourth jhana. And in the commentaries, they go into this phenomena that the breathing slows down. Let me say physiologically, at the time of the Buddha and in the commentaries, they're very unaware of this thing called the brain. They don't categorize it in the 32 parts of the body even. The brain is missing. It's categorized as bone marrow. It's the gushy stuff inside of a bone. In the ancient world, across the ancient world, this is startling sometimes for the modern mind. We just presume everybody understands where thinking comes from is the brain and so forth. But in the ancient world, that was not the case. There was some sense that the mind emerges from the heart. And we know emotionally, when we feel, and that's the sense of the mind in the ancient world is a combination of thought and feeling. And we feel it in our heart, throughout the center of our body. Sometimes we feel it in our throat. We get choked up. We feel it in the guts. If you get a strong, difficult message, you feel like you've been kicked in the stomach. Your heart is moved by certain things and so forth. So they located the mind in another area of the body rather than the brain. Aristotle thought the brain was more or less a way to get rid of heat. It was a heat regulator because the head radiates a lot of heat. So this idea that the brain is the locus of thought is a recent one. But what we know in modern times is the brain is a major user of oxygen. Maybe 80% of your oxygen demand is to the brain. And when you stop thinking, as emotional states will even make more demand. So notice that breathing becomes rapid when people are afraid and when they're angry, and it also becomes irregular. And when you're calm, the number of respirations per minute starts to drop, becomes regular, and that is to some degree the oxygen demand from the brain. So one can, in meditation, as you shut down the actual thinking processes, that prefrontal cortex which is the major demand place, reduces demand, and so breathing slows down. I've talked about this many times in talking about what is called jhana, the deep meditations. I say one of the characteristics that you can sort of objectively measure is that the respiration rates go down. And even in the first jhana or second jhana, the respirations would not be more than about 2.5 breaths per minute. And as one goes into the deeper ones, the respirations per minute even subside, become less. Now, they didn't have objective measurements. So they weren't somebody standing beside somebody in the fourth jhana measuring the oxygen uptake. They just didn't do that. What the commentaries say is that as you go deeper, you might have a kind of worry that you're dying because you're not breathing anymore. That doesn't mean that the breathing ceases. That's a little bit much. It means that the respiration becomes so few breaths per minute, and the depth is not required, that one becomes alarmed and then disturbs your meditation. Doesn't mean, they don't declare that breathing stops, but it certainly goes down. And remember, this is not a scientific culture where in modern times we're able to measure all of these things, oxygen in the blood and all this stuff. So I wouldn't take it too literally that breathing ceases in the fourth jhana, or that somehow you absorb it through the skin. That's an interesting attempt to explain it, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that scientifically speaking, breathing ceases in the fourth jhana. It becomes very subtle and maybe, but you do not need to be concerned about it. And there are, in modern times, there's a few sports, and one of them is holding your breath underwater. And of course, it started with free diving, where you don't use scuba tanks and so forth. And how deep can you dive, and how long can you stay underwater? And it's astonishing what they discover. Now, unaided holding the breath can be up to 11 minutes. It's possible to hold your breath for 11 minutes, but that it requires absolute immobility and a few little sort of hyper breathings and also kind of meditative state as well. And then with oxygen preliminaries, so breathing pure oxygen and so forth, it's up to 24 minutes now. Like a human can go without breathing underwater, motionless in a kind of a meditation state, up to 24 minutes if they've pre-inhaled pure oxygen. So you can see that, and these people who practice this kind of weird sport describe exactly how they manage to do this and train themselves to do this. And they do talk about the mental state. It's very important to wind that down to some degree. So you can see that they've explored this relationship between respiration and brain activity, consciousness. Okay, next question.
The next question is from the live chat from Upasika Mustafa. Dear Ajahn, I really like the idea that you have to practice dancing to learn to dance. Therefore, to overcome dukkha, one must practice overcoming dukkha. So it seems that doing hard, painful practices is the only solution to get rid of dukkha. On the other hand, there are ideas such as the middle path and emptiness, which ultimately lead to the fact that dukkha and sukha are both empty, and one should dwell in equanimity instead. So why should we value the joy in the practice and not pay attention directly to the equanimity?
Yeah, so some misunderstandings there. There are two types of sukha. Now, sukha means happiness. And there's various types of dukkha, which is unhappiness, pain. So there's sukha or happiness based on worldly experiences. So your favorite food or a nice day or something like that, music that you like, produces happiness. And that's worldly happiness. So the advocacy is not towards worldly happiness, but it is towards unworldly happiness, sukha. So the 7 factors of enlightenment, one of the factors is joy, the emotion of joy, but based on spiritual development. And so when you detach yourself from the world, where you're not dependent on sensory experiences for happiness, the mind, it's in its nature. The Buddha talks about this. The mind, without the 5 hindrances of greed and anger, sloth, agitation, and doubt, returns to a nature of luminosity and ease. That's its nature when it's not being harassed. The mind just returns to that state. So it just falls into that, and that state is not dependent on the world and our worldly experience. By the way, the world, the Buddha defines the world as what you experience through the senses. So sights, sounds, smells, taste, touches, and mental activity are what is called the world. So that's where the world arises in your experience of it. So we're not talking about the sort of scientifically objective exterior world apart from the experience of it by a human. The world we're concerned with is that which we experience directly and subjectively. And this is all that some people know. They don't know there is any other way to be than to hook themselves in or attach themselves to chasing after pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and ideas, and being disappointed and emotionally in pain when they encounter unpleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and ideas. So the spiritual solution is to find a place outside of that impossible to control situation, where the mind swings from from joy to ease and equanimity. Equanimity, by the way, is not absence of joy. It is a form of joy. It's a very balanced and even form of joy. It's that which you experience near the center of the teeter-totter. So your experience this divine. It's also one of the divine emotions. So these are called Brahma Viharas, where the gods live. One of them is loving loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and the last one is equanimity. And this is a divine place to be. Divine, meaning just exquisitely serene and beautiful. Not simply detached or robotic, but exquisite and unaffected by the teeter-totter of success and failure and praise and blame and obscurity and fame, good fortune, bad fortune. This is the teeter-totter, and equanimity abides in the center of the teeter-totter. Doesn't go up or down with it, but remains in an exquisite kind of bliss. So this is the nature of it. As to the learning to dance, this is the spiritual path. It's not painful to learn to dance. It's that you can't dance yet until you learn the steps. And the steps, learning the steps, is not the dance yet. But you need to go through the motions first. You need to know where to put your foot and where to, etc. For some people, it's very difficult. They may not be gifted, or they may be rather awkward, but they learn the steps of the dance. And the learning process may be enjoyable, but it's still not the dance. It's only when you can forget the having to remember the move and so forth, when it becomes automatic, that it becomes the dance. So this is the same with spiritual development. You keep forgetting, you get angry, and then you think, oh, here I am, I'm angry. I decided not to be angry, but now I'm angry again. My mindfulness lapsed. So my ability, I forgot not to be angry. I went to my old habits. So this is this business, which is work of keeping aware and returning to the elimination of the 5 hindrances, and then bringing yourself back to some little indication of the 7 factors of enlightenment. Now, at first, you don't naturally feel the luminosity of mind and ease. So you're struggling with the 5 hindrances and still not able to feel the spiritual joy. So that can be a bit of a desert that you have to cross. But when you do find yourself on the other side, you're very glad that you went through the experience, because staying on the uncertain side is the Buddha calls this the one shore where it floods. So on one shore, floods and fires. If you can cross the river, which takes, you have to get a raft to get across, that is the Eightfold Path. Once you get to the other shore, you're glad you did, because it doesn't flood on that shore. You're out of that danger zone. Just look at the news all over the world. These floods and volcanoes and wildfires. Here, we're not troubled by floods here, unless it's a basement flood from the ground source water, which we managed to solve. That was one of the early difficulties. We did trenching and landscaping to solve that. But here in Canada, we are now subject to almost every summer of the year, vast wildfires come through. And even if they don't burn your place down, the smoke can hover in the air for weeks at a time, and you get emergency calls to get out of your building, so that in case the fire comes towards you. And so we've evacuated a few times, and we are subject to this. So as long as you stay in this world, such things happen. Even on a larger basis, there's still a chance of a meteor hitting the Earth, and there's nuclear war, the global heating, sea level rise, volcanoes. There's this huge, what are called a super volcano, located in the Yellowstone National Park, which is unlikely to go off, but if it does, it's basically game over for everybody within 1,000 miles. and the entire world will be affected by this. So we're living in a very precarious situation. Is there a place that you can find by whatever exercise you can go through that is aloof from this precarious situation? Okay, let's go on.
Next question from the live chat is from Jane in England. Kissing the leper versus the highest blessings, I'm a bit confused. Association with angry people?
Yeah, so Jane is referring to a talk I gave on loving kindness called Kissing the Leper, and that I was using an example of St. Francis, who had... St. Francis is he's a Catholic saint, I guess the love saint. The love that we're talking about is kind of a universal love. In Christianity, it's more for humans rather than animals. In Buddhism, we also include animals in this goodwill. But he went through this emotional revelation at a young age, about 24, I think he was. And before that, he was quite the dashing playboy. He's from a fairly wealthy family. He liked to mix it up, a little bit of fighting and chasing the ladies. And Anyway, he ended up in jail. Got caught by the enemies. He was in a little bit of a war situation, got caught and put in prison and so forth. And anyway, he had a revelation there, changed him. And he tells this story that in his, of course, in Italy at the time, this is about the 12th century AD in Italy, and leprosy was fairly common, and they didn't know how to treat it. And people were walking around with this, you parts of your body start to fall, fingers fall off and you're disfigured, and it's horrific. And they didn't know whether it was how much communication it had, whether you could get infected from them. They didn't know much about it, and there was no treatment for it. So they just they were isolated, and you had to stay on the outskirts of town, and people would just leave food for them. And the leper wore these cloaks, so partly because they were disfigured, parts of their nose was gone, their chunks of their face and so forth. They were hooded figures, and they didn't smell good, and they carried a bell with them, and they were obliged by law to ring the bell to warn people that they were a leper and not to come close to them. So you can imagine the emotional devastation of this for the person, the leper. But Francis said in his childhood that he'd seen these horrifying figures, and it just gave him nightmares. As a child, you can imagine, these are the Walking Dead, right? You got these horror videos these days, horror programs called The Walking Dead and zombies and so forth. And this is a living experience of these zombies. And so for children, it's just horrifying. So after his Christian conversion to universal loving kindness, he realized, why am I horrified by these? This person is in great distress. This is a normal person that just happened to get this disease. And so he was out one day on his horse, and he rode up and saw a leper, and he had this fear reaction swept over him, old habits. This is after his conversion. He had this fear reaction. And then he recognized, I've got this fear and aversion, horror reaction. This is no longer the case. So he got down off his horse and he went over to the leper and told the leper, when I saw you, I was afraid and repulsed, and I realized that this is not appropriate. And then he hugged the leper and gave a kiss to the leper, kissing the leper. This is the magnificence of loving kindness. People put themselves in the way of harm in order to help other people, first responders and so forth, fire people and so forth, put themselves in the way of harm in order out of compassion and loving kindness. Nurses, doctors, this pandemic and everything is, who's taking care of people that have the virus? Somebody has to go in there, hopefully with a mask, and deal with it, but they do have a chance of contacting it themselves. So this is grand loving kindness. And so it wasn't meant for associating with angry people. It's not that. And I would advise people that not to hang out with foolish. So this is the other side of that coin, is do not associate with the foolish. The Buddha's advice, don't associate with the foolish. Now, who are the foolish? Those are who are without morality or angry and greedy and so forth, and not interested in changing their ways. So the Buddha says, don't waste your time with that, and spend your time with people who are wise, who are moral and practicing in the spiritual way, and that is helpful to you. And because the other one is quite often a waste of time, but it doesn't mean that you should go and hug the angry or anything like this. It might get more angry. Buddhism, one of the things that Buddhist monks are not to do is proselytize without invitation. So to go knocking on people's door and saying, "Have you heard the good news?" So you know that there are sects of Christianity, I guess other religions as well, that they're barging into people's spaces and trying to convert them. Monks are not allowed to do that, but if you have invitation, if somebody wants to know the Dhamma, then you can share the Dhamma with them. But it's quite a waste of time and energy to foist yourself on people to deliberately do that without their invitation. And you'll find that it works much better. You waste less time and you get more success if people are asking to be taught something rather than trying to force them to learn something. So this is a matter of attitudes, and I hope that have cleared up your confusion about this business of hugging or kissing the leper and avoiding angry people. Jane in England.
This question from the live stream is from Johan. Dear Ajahn, sense restraint and celibacy seem to make me even more sensitive, at times overwhelmed with intense emotions. It's like a roller coaster ride. Is this Mara struggling to keep me in samsara? This is what you find is like, you, especially as you meditate and reduce your sensory experience, you become less calloused to the situation and more sensitive to the situation. So this is the case. You go to a meditation. People have this experience. They're trying to meditate to make themselves more, equanimous in the world. But at the beginning, at least, meditation quite often makes you more sensitive. So you're in a 10-day silent retreat, and on the 8th day somebody sneezes, and you think, don't they? Why are they disturbing my meditation? It's just, other people are living above a bar, on a little apartment above a bar, and there's just endless fights in the street and shouts in the night and breaking glass and cars revving their engines, and you get used to it after gunshots. You get used to it, kind of desensitized to the whole thing. And then you go and meditate, and then somebody, sneezes. It's in, and you have this, why can't they be more quiet? Don't they understand I'm meditating? So this is part of the process. Yeah, you will. And also emotionally, like just some little moment can make you tear up a little bit. Just it moves you. You become quite sensitive. So this is the mysterious process of the path. There's a beautiful thing. It's from the Mahayana tradition, I think, is that the bodhisattva's heart is able to withstand hurricane-level waves, but is sensitive enough to register, like the ocean. So the ocean has massive waves in it, but does not overflow its bounds. And then when it's on a calm day, a single drop of rain ripples through it. So this is the so-called the mind of the bodhisattva, the spiritual practitioner, where they can endure wars and great upheavals. With their spiritual practice allows them to go through these things, but they remain sensitive to the single emotional distress of a person. They are sensitive to that, so that like a single drop of rain falling on the surface of the ocean, is a little ripple goes out from that. So the ocean remains sensitive to a single drop of rain falling on it. At the same time, it doesn't overflow its bounds when great hurricanes and waves are in it. Next question is from Upasaka Ludovic in Brossard, Quebec, Canada. I have 3 kids. The oldest is 4 years old. She started to talk about death, and I'm pretty honest with her about the things I know and about the things I don't know. My wife asks me to check in with a monk before going too much into details about Buddhist concepts. Some things might not be age appropriate. How would you go about it, Longpor? Are there places to tiptoe around not to get my kid in trouble with the other kids at daycare?
Well, yeah, I remember as a kid, that you start to have questions. I mean, one of them was like, where's the realization of where does the universe end? And I was lying in my bed, I'm 6 years old, whatever, thinking like there must be like, it has to be like a wall at the end, like what that. But then I almost went to sleep, and then I thought, what's on the other side of the wall? Like, well, how thick could the wall be? This is like, oh. So I had to ask my mother about this. And she gave me great advice, which she had never heard from the Buddha. She just says, forget about that. Just don't think about it. Okay. Well, so your mother knows everything, so you just stop thinking about it. So that was great advice, Mom. Thanks. So death, death will come up for children. What happens if a cat dies or something dies, and then what happened to them? You can give them several kind of advice. You can give them Socrates' advice: nothing bad happens to a good person. So not to fear anything, just be a good person, and that's your protection in life. Is in all kind of situations, just being a good person is your major protection. You just don't think about each situation that could happen. Just concentrate on being good and not regretting anything. If they're a little older or they can understand it, you can say, well, a person can never experience death. If death is nothing, then you don't get to experience it. Now, this is this is philosophy, but sometimes children can understand this. This is the teaching of the Stoics, the Greek philosophers. Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. So this is you can even teach them this little phrase: where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. Meaning that you can't experience not being, or you can't experience not experiencing. So you don't have to concern yourself. And various people have theories about what happens when you die, but one thing that doesn't happen to you is that you die. You can't experience non-being. You can only experience being. So the only thing you ever have to think about or concern yourself with is being. The only thing you'll ever do is exist. You will never not exist, by definition. You can never not exist. Other people, they can not exist, but you can't not exist. You can only exist. And so you keep your interest in this thing called existence. How do I make it better? How do I make my existence better? Because I don't have to think about, worry about, concern myself with not existing, because I will never not exist. Yeah. Okay, we have time for one more question, I think.
Ajahn, the final question today is from Zachary in the live stream. In the connected discourses, the Buddha said to make haste with your practice, but to me this contradicts the middle way. Please help me clear up my confusion.
Yeah, a sense of urgency is important. We don't know how long we have in this life, and if in the next life, what will the opportunities be? Or even in the next day, what will the opportunities be? If so, the Buddha is saying, remember, death is is certain, but when is uncertain. Change your situation that you have now with access to Dhamma is available to you, but tomorrow will it be? So you want to have a sense of urgency, and that's called chanda, or right aspiration. And you muster up energy and determination in this. So that there are spiritual teachings where you're not supposed to have any desire to attain enlightenment, because that's desire, and enlightenment is the absence of desire. The Buddha dismisses this kind of talk by saying a man has a sliver in his hand, and then he gets a needle to get the sliver out. When he gets the sliver out, he doesn't need the needle anymore, because he has neither the sliver nor the needle. The sliver is, you got a spiritual problem, you got suffering. The needle is Dhamma, and you have to stick it in there and get that sliver out as fast as you can. But then you can abandon the needle. It's over. The requirement, the need for that aspiration, that chanda, that spiritual urgency is now set aside. But until that time, you still need to maintain a sense of urgency. It doesn't mean anxiety. It doesn't mean nervousness. It means a reasoned and coherent and optimal economy of spiritual motion, or economy of spiritual practice. It's not just willy-nilly running in the dark. It is educating yourself and making sure that your types of practices are optimal for the achieving of your goal. Yeah. Okay, so we will end it for today, but next week we will be in a different location. And that location is, shall we say? Shall we tell them where that is? Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're not sure of the time, because we have to take some of this equipment with us. And is it in a different time zone? Yes. So it's 1 hour. So later. We will, stay tuned. It'll be on a Sunday. And it'll be in a different location, Santa Fe, New Mexico. And probably in the morning, but who knows? Because we haven't been there yet. We have to have some equipment with us and so forth. And then the following week, are we still in Santa Fe? Yeah, so two weeks in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Why? You can ask next week. Why are you in Santa Fe, New Mexico? And we'll leave that curious, unanswered, dangling question for you. Yeah. Bye-bye for now.